Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. We're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and this is a second-time guest. We have Todd Caponi joining us here on the show. Todd, those of you who have been listening to the show for a little while, you might recognize Todd's name. He joined us just a couple months ago where we talked about his book, The Transparency Sale. And in part two, what we talked about, and actually part three, because I just finished my conversation with Todd and we're going to split that out. So he's going to be a three-time guest technically. In part two, what we're going to talk about and what you're going to hear in just a couple of minutes is all around how do you apply this idea of the transparency sale to pricing and negotiation. So a lot of times you're in there in the final throes of trying to get a deal over the line, trying to get that deal converted. And there's all kinds of how do you negotiate? How do you get somebody to say yes? How do you deal with price questions and negotiating on price? And so what do you do when people ask you for discounts that you don't want to give or you can't even afford to give? How do you deal with all of those different parts of the sales process? And so in the first part of the conversation with Todd today, we talked about transparency negotiation, and then we talked about transparency pricing, how to introduce price into your sales conversations early in the sales process so that you can qualify the wrong deals out and make sure that there's alignment with the right deals so that there's no surprises later on in the sales process. So that's all I'm going to preface the first part of the conversation with. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. Lots of great tips and stories and frameworks that Todd shares in our conversation. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Todd Caponi, talking about the transparency sale applied to negotiation and pricing. Number one, welcome back to the show. We've only had a couple of guests come back for a second round. Maybe because they didn't want to, but partly because it's hard to fit people in. And I know you're super busy with your schedule. And so not everybody had listened, maybe not has listened to part one of our conversation. And so first of all, I just want to give you an opportunity just to tell people about you, what you do. Your book, The Transparency Sale, was the core of what we talked about before. And we want to pick up a couple of the topics we didn't get to the first time around, but people say, "Hey, Todd, what is it that you do?" How do you describe that to people?
Yeah, it's funny because right now, and I think we're probably going to get to this, I'm on this whole sales history.
Yeah.
I'm so fascinated with it. But right now, my world and my business is really focused on speaking and workshops. So teaching the concepts of transparency to sales organizations. And specifically, there's been a lot around negotiation and something called the presentation choreography. But at its core, what it's all about is this idea that transparency sells better than perfection. And because of the proliferation of reviews, feedback, and just general information about everything we do, buy, and experience, we now have to do it anyway. And so what I do is to help companies embrace that because it's good for their sales pursuits. It's good for the future of the sales profession. And we got to do it anyway.
Yeah. No, I love that. And for anybody that missed part one, definitely go back and listen to it because you've got some great stories there in the book. And the book, The Transparency Sale, I've got it in front of me. I still have all the tabs in it from the first time we talked.
That's amazing.
So definitely grab a copy of that. Specifically, one of the topics that we didn't get to last time as it relates to transparency, and you and I emailed a bit about this, was around pricing, right? So pricing from a transparency standpoint, I think a lot of people always want to know, how do I think about price? How do I present price? And there's whole companies like Profitwell and Patrick Campbell and his team over there. That's all they do is think about price. And so I'll just start with a very open, broad question, and then we can narrow it down into some subtopics here. How does the concept of the transparency sale, how should one apply those concepts to this idea of price if I'm selling to the enterprise?
Yeah, so there's two things. So first of all, in the book, I've got a chapter called Transparent Negotiating, and I'm going to explain what that is. However, about 3 weeks ago in the American Marketing Association Journal, so I've got it here and I've burned through an entire highlighter. There is a new study that was done by a combination of professors from the University of Texas, University of Utah, University of Denver, that said, and here's the title, Open Negotiation, the Back-End Benefits of Salespeople's Transparency in the Front End. And it's data that supports this idea that, historically, we've all been taught to hold the price until the end, until we've established value. Well, I've believed that that's actually not the right way to do it. And finally, the research is supporting me in this idea that when we hide our price, it's actually a form of not being transparent. And that when we actually lead with pricing as a part of our initial transparency, it not only builds trust, it speeds sales cycles, it qualifies deals in faster that you're going to win, it qualifies deals out faster that you're going to lose anyway, and it allows the buying brain to be able to assess value against what the cost is going to be. In other words, we're all wired when we're making a purchase decision to try to figure out, is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? Now, if a salesperson walks in and just talks about the value of the juice all day long, and we have no idea what that squeeze is going to be, our brain has a hard time filing all of that until we get the squeeze element, right? That's why negative reviews on a website work, right? That's why we are wired, 82% of us, to read the negative reviews before we buy something online. It's the same thing here. We're trying to understand what that squeeze is. So that's the new stuff that I've been really, really focused on. The transparent negotiations is a very counterintuitive concept that I accidentally stumbled on 12 years ago. And so I'll give you the quick story if you'd like. Here's what happened. I was invited by my rep. I was the VP of sales for a SaaS tech company. It was SaaS before we actually called it SaaS, but that's what it was. $1.5 million deal, 3-year deal. My rep calls me and is just like, hey, we're trying to negotiate the final elements of this deal. The procurement head is getting frustrated that every time he asks me for something, I got to call you. Will you just come down to Houston and let's get in a room and bang this thing out? Sure. I go down to Houston, walk into the room, and it's not just this one procurement person, but it's their whole team. And like there was drool coming out of a couple of them, like, oh yeah, negotiation, right? Because that's historically we've been taught to treat negotiations like we're trying to get hostages released from a bank heist. And so like that's the way we're wired, is to put up our defenses. I decided, you know what? I've got nothing to lose here. I threw my cards face up on the table and basically said, hey, listen, I know where this is going. I know exactly what you're about to ask for. So can I just tell you what we care about as an organization? And they're like, yeah, have at it, have fun. And I listed out 4 things that we care about. Volume, so how much you buy, timing of cash, how fast you pay, length of commitment, so how long you commit, and when you sign, because there's value to us in our ability to forecast and our ability to resource deals like this. They then said, fascinating, we need 30% off. And instead of going into this historic ping pong battle where you're like, I can only do 10, and then you keep going back and forth until you end up in the middle where you've laid 20% out and they've said yes to it. So you've basically just given them 20% in the form of charity to their bottom line. Instead of doing that lying game, instead I said, hey, remember those 4 things we talked about? We might actually have a path to help get you there. Commit to more volume. We'll pay you in the form of a discount to do that. Pay us faster. So 3-year deal, pay us all of it up front. I'll pay you in the form of a discount. Commit longer. Or let's mutually align around the timing of when you think you're going to get this done. I'll even give you a little buffer on the back end of it. And if you can help us forecast, we'll pay you in the form of a discount to do that. What happened was all of that drooling went away. They started negotiating their own deal. And I was like, wait a second, like what just happened? And so over the last 12 years, I've built the behavioral science pieces into it and turned it into a formal workshop that, I taught to 350 sellers at Exact Target. But, back when I was on the leadership team over there, and it had magical impacts. But that's essentially it. I think there's an opportunity for us to lay our cards face up on a table instead of eroding trust at the goal line, getting value for every dollar we give away in the form of a discount. And then this new research in the Journal of Marketing Research is just proving that there's tremendous value to being upfront with your pricing and use that as a transparent element to build trust and end up with more valuable deals where your customers stay, buy more, and advocate.
All right, folks, you're off and running in my second conversation with Todd Caponi. Listen, I'm really stoked that you're listening to the show. I really appreciate it. We've been watching the numbers go up every month. We've been doing this now for about 5 years, believe it or not. We've done over 100 episodes with our guests. We've done lots of other episodes that are recordings from different webinars and videos and daily doses and all that stuff. it's one of my favorite things to do every week is to hop on a call, interview people like Todd, and bring their knowledge, their expertise, and their genius to you. So I just want to say thank you for listening to the show. I would certainly appreciate it if you could share this show with a friend or 10. Let people know that you've been listening to the Startup Selling Show, that there's some great tactical sales tips, especially for startups and tech companies. And then secondly, leave a review. That's one of the ways that Apple Podcasts and these other podcast platforms, this is what they use to suggest our show to other people. Viral is still the best way for people to learn about the show and subscribe to the episodes. So if they see your reviews, it'll put this show in front of them, make it easier for them to subscribe. And then of course, if you tell a friend or 10, that would be great too. So that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Todd Caponi. I love that story. And I think that the thing I like about the negotiation and these 4 pillars or the 4 things you care about, I think what it does, it appears to give the buyer a sense of control while keeping control yourself, right? Because they were looking at you and saying, well, what's behind your curtain? And they feel like, oh, if we asked for 30, could we have asked for 40?
Right.
And he said, if he says yes to 30, and they're going to feel like they left something on the table. And then it also just objectively creates these dials on the table. It's like these are the 4 things we have to work with. If you want 30%, here's how we can do it. We can up volume and increase the speed. If we do those things, there's your 30%. If you're not comfortable with that volume, then we could do a longer term. And if we do longer term, there's where you get the 30%. And it's almost like you're working on a problem together when you're on their side of the table, putting the puzzle pieces together and how to get to the 30% that they want to.
Exactly. I mean, the 4 levers are essentially a couple of things. They're probably the levers that they have on their end, right? Like they would like to commit to as little as possible, pay as slowly as possible, commit to the shortest period of time as possible, and sign whenever the hell they want. And basically what we're just sharing with them is, hey, this is how we run a business here, right? This is what success looks like to us. This is the foundation of how our pricing is structured. And if you want to change any of those elements, cool, here's how you do it. Now, it's not just price, right? They ask for a discount, but 20 minutes later, they're saying, hey, we can't pay net 30, we want to pay net 60. Like, okay, well, our pricing is based on net 30 as I laid out for you. If you want to change that to net 60, you can, but we're going to have to change one of the other elements. Either you pay more, commit longer, help me forecast, commit to more volume, right? You can use these levers both ways in a very collaborative trust building exercise with your buyers. And that the magic is not only in the first purchase, but what was funny was when I was the CRO of Power Reviews, one of our existing clients was like a notorious jerk. He's head of e-commerce for a apparel company, and he hated salespeople. And when renewal time would come up, he would call me, right? Like I'd phone ring, and I'm like, oh, here he is again. What's up? And he said, hey, Todd, it's renewal time. I don't feel like dealing with the reps. Here's what I need. We're at 120 a year. We need to come down to 105. And I was just like, how long have you known me? And he's like, is it the effing levers again? I'm like, yeah, of course it's the levers again. He's like, all right, remind me what they are. And so I laid him on them, and he was like, I'll call you right back. And then he called me back and he was like, hey, we're going to do the renewal. I think I've calculated this right, Todd. Tell me if I'm wrong, but we're going to commit to 3 years in the renewal instead of 1 year. And we'd been paying biannually. There's really no reason why we can't pay annually to you. And I can see based on what you laid out that there's a benefit there, right? I think I've got it down to 112.5, 3-year commitment paid up front. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. I'll have the rep send over the paperwork, and then I'll talk to you in 3 years, jerk. But like, I didn't say that last part. Yeah. But essentially, it was actually, I think I did say that last part just to crack them up. The point being, it's not just for your new business pursuits, but when your customers learn it, they negotiate their own upsells, their own renewals. It's just an element of transparency that plays a big role in the lifespan of a relationship that you have with a customer.
And what do you do in a situation where this customer did their own calculations? They said, I'm at 112.5. They started the conversation at like, I need to be at 105. And right now in the world that we're living in, everyone's selling to the CFO. And if the CFO is just like, look, I get it. I appreciate that you want to be at 130 with the levers are down to 112. We got 105 in the budget. I got to have 105.
Yep. Yeah. And it always has to go back to the levers and playing those transparently and authentically. And so for a CFO like that, it's an instance of having the conversation again. And sometimes you get the CFO that helicopters in at the end, right?
Yeah.
Like your sponsor has gotten it down to the 112.5, and now the CFO's like, it's got to be 105.
Yeah.
And in instances like that, I've re-explained the levers to them and say, hey, listen, for us to run a profitable business, these are the levers. This is the way it works. If you need to still get it down another, $7,500 or whatever it is, and we're going to have to look at that volume component. It just means committing to less technology on your end, right?
Mm.
You can, pay us faster, but we've already pulled that lever. You can commit longer. We've already pulled that lever. This is a renewal, so it can't really help you on the timing thing. So the only one left is maybe a few less licenses this year, or maybe remove this add-on, and you can get down to your 105. You're going to lose value there, but that's up to you to decide.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to be confident in your delivery of that. And 99.9 out of 100 times, your buyers, especially if they're CFOs who understand how businesses are run and how to achieve profitability, you're going to find that oftentimes they'll go quiet. Like the one instance where this similar thing happened, where I laid that on the CFO. The CFO, as a professional negotiator, it was like you could hear tumbleweed blowing through the phone when I delivered that message. And I put my phone on mute, and I was IMing the rep, and I was like, he's got to speak next. And I don't care if it's 30 seconds. And it felt like 30 seconds, but it was like 7. He would and then finally he was just like, let me do the numbers again. I'll get back to you. Right. But there is that element. There are the kind of hostage negotiation techniques. I love Chris Voss's book.
I was about to say, I'm thinking about Chris Voss right now. And
yeah. I mean, that book is fantastic.
Yeah.
But again, remember the premise of Never Split the Difference is you walk into a bank heist, there's 10 hostages. You would never walk in and go, you know what, just give me 5 and you can go ahead and kill the other 5. But you'd never do that. Of course, your goal is to get all 10. Well, in a technology negotiation, playing this transparent card will help you to get to a point where you are exchanging value for value, and you're never giving away dollars without getting something of equal value in return, because that's the goal, right? You're trying to get out of the business of discount as a charity to a company's bottom line and get more into the business of confidence in the way that you've built your pricing structure. And I'll tell you the other element of this, that most organizations that I teach this to, their comp plans are built on this, right? Their comp plans are built on, bookings or revenue. And then reps oftentimes will either get paid faster in their comp, or they'll get a little bonus for getting upfront annual payments. They'll get a little bonus for multi-year commitments. They obviously have quotas, so the timing and the forecasting is an important element. This approach is how businesses make money, how reps make money, and how the customers you're selling to probably make money too, right? They want customers to buy more, pay faster, commit longer, and be predictable. And that's all we're trying to do, is establish that baseline and use those levers as your mechanism of getting out of the business of discounting as a charity.
And what would you do in the situation that's 7,500 where there really is the chasm? They only got 105. That's the number not just given to the CFO, or the CFO's number is the board. I was like, everybody's got a boss. It's like, wow, it's not even my number as a CFO. Like the board told me we have to cut back all expenses by 15% this year. The 7,500 is the difference between, having 105 in revenue or having 0 and losing a long-term customer where your cost of acquisition is 8 to 1.
Yep.
That's the calculus in my head. At what point do you number one, what would you do? Would you walk away at some point if somebody's not willing to play along with those levers?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's just a matter of, hey, we'll just sign you up for a few less licenses this year. Or you've got a couple of these add-ons, remove that one add-on that I don't know if you and your organization are really getting a ton of value from, and you're down to the 105. You're actually down to 100 now, right? It's about exploring ways and holding true to the levers, because the second you give something in the form of charity, the second that they do what you said earlier, which is, well, what else does he have behind there? Maybe that was a cool trick. Maybe we should try something else. And so that's the thing we need to be careful of. And I'm telling you that there might be the one anomaly where they just say, well, Todd, we're going with somebody else. I rarely, if ever, have seen that happen. For the most part, when it gets to the CFO, he's not in the business of trying to rip out a solution that you already have, because the cost of doing so will more than trump that 7,500 that they're trying to save.
Yeah,
and in the end,
the transaction cost, the switching cost, and when you're talking about true enterprise that we're talking about here, oftentimes what is perceived as a competitor, it's not this perfect, like, this is their feature set and this is our feature set. There's always going to be some level of overlap, but there's also going to be some parts to our platform that's going to be different from theirs. And there's a reason they bought from you in the first place. So,
and that goes back to that idea of leading with price as a part of transparency. So again, the transparency sale is about this idea that when we buy online, we read the negative reviews first, right? And what that does to the buying brain. There's so many lessons to learn from how consumers act when they buy, because it's exactly the same brains that are used to buy in an enterprise or in a business. However, this pricing element is a really, really important one as well, because so often I was just doing a workshop for a company in the accounting software space. And what they found in leading with price is that sometimes they're in the wrong deal. What they find, their solution is a six-figure implementation, a six-figure investment and implementation. One of their competitors is a five-figure, like low five figures. And when they can come in and say, like, here's what we're great at, here's what we give up to be great at that core. And oh, by the way, we're going to get to know each other and get real specific about what your pricing looks like. But for a company like yours, based on the number of employees, it's probably going to be in this range. Now, if that's going to create some heartache, let's talk about that now instead of waiting. And if we're way off, maybe we could save each other a ton of time. Yeah. And they've run into instances where they've said, for a company like yours, it's probably 150, 160K. And the customer's like, we were planning on a 12K investment. Like, yeah. Okay, well, since we're way off, here's the types of companies and why they invest at this level. Now, if that's not you or there's just no way, here's another company that you can talk to that is pretty effective at that, 10 to 20K range. And they're like the relationship that builds with that customer has more often than not even brought the customer to, whoa, don't go. I want to understand why companies like mine are investing 150K in this. And it builds a foundation of trust. So like, don't be afraid to lead with that price, because if it turns out that customer's like, unless there's rocks here that have like $1,000 bills, we're not going to be able to even get at more than 15K this year. Like, cool. All right. I'm in the wrong deal. You're talking to the wrong person right now. Let's save each other a ton of time. And you end up spending time on the opportunities that you can and should win, instead of trying to push a boulder up to the hill with a customer that clearly isn't going to be able to get at that extra six figures.
Yeah. And going back to your levers as well, this is where that comes into play, because I could imagine from a selling standpoint, if you're desperate for customers or you really want to get this deal, you might say to yourself, well, maybe there's a path that they say, like, our budget's 15, but maybe we could get up to like 40 if it's really good. And you're thinking to yourself, we usually charge 150, but maybe we could do this one deal for 40 and get them on board. And then both sides are actually sacrificing and it's not a good fit. Mm-hmm. And so I would like, if you're in this zone where you're like, I'm getting lots of these deals coming in that are way lower than what we want to charge, I would go back to ask the question, like, are you sure you're targeting the right people in the first place?
Exactly.
Like, this is about your lead gen. Like, your lead qualification is doing the right thing because you're smoking this out early. But if you're getting a lot of that, getting a few of those is fine. But most of the people should at least go, okay, yeah, we roughly expected something in the 1 to 200K range.
Right, exactly. And you and I, before we hit record on this, we did a little rant together. I'll give you.
Oh, that's recorded.
Oh, it is? Sweet. All right, so I'll give you another little rant. One of the things that I used to do wrong as a sales leader is math, meaning I would look at a rep and say, here's your quota, and at any time you need to have 3 to 4x your quota in pipeline, right? Because it's math. If we only close 25% of our deals, then at any time, to be proactive, to be confident that we're going to be able to hit our targets, you need to be at 4x. I have recently discovered how stupid that is. And here's why. If we are incentivizing our reps and using this as a measure to say, hey, rep, get to 4x, guess what happens? They get to 4x. They end up with 75% of their deals in their pipeline are crap, because we basically push them to, hey, qualify deals in as much as possible, because if we don't have the pipeline, we're not going to hit. Instead of going, wait a second, why are we only closing 25% of our pipeline? If we did a better job of qualifying up front, couldn't we get that up to 50%? Couldn't we do a better job of working on the opportunities we should win? And instead of that old axiom of 4x of our quota in pipeline, man, wouldn't we be awesome if we only had 2x, but we were closing more than 50% of the deals that we qualified instead of only 20 to 30%. That was one of the things that I realized a little bit late is qualification as a skill and losing fast. We always say it, but do we actually use that mantra as a measure in our business? Because again, 4x would be great if all of those deals were of high quality, but if all we're looking at is the numbers, we forget this idea that why are we qualifying all of these deals in without qualifying deals out faster that we know we're going to lose? And this pricing is part of it. Transparency is a huge part of it. To help reps get better at losing fast is just a huge value to organizations and their focus.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it goes all the way up the pipeline too. You look at like, well, how many demos are you doing? Well, why does it matter? Right? How many
Right.
demos I'm doing? Am I doing demos with the right people? Or the sense of like, I'm sending 100 emails to book one meeting or 1.5 meetings. Like, well, that's just the number. Like, well, what if it wasn't the number? Like Jason Day was coaching in our program, who runs Blissful Prospect. And he's like, why does 1% have to be the number? What if your number was like 15%? How much more magical would the rest of your sales process be?
Yeah. I actually
hitting that number.
Yeah, I just went on. I did a Friday morning rant video on that a couple of weeks ago too, where there's a company that I was talking to that they'd seen this data that said that it takes 18 touches to get to an executive today.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, crap, we're stopping at 10. We need to add 8. And I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. They add 8. Why are the first 17 going on deaf ears? It's because the content, the message is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like, fix that problem. It's not you don't do enough. Are you crazy? Like, focus on the content. The content is the problem, not the number of touches. And then if 18 is the average, is your goal to be average, right? Like, there's an opportunity to be better than average, and that doesn't mean 26. It means getting so efficient, to your point, about instead of 1%, the 25% or 50%, what impact that would make if all it took were 3 or 4. You're doing something right if you're doing that.
Like, what if you could only send 3 or 4 messages or have a 5-touch sequence and then you're done? You're not allowed to do anything. If you set those rules up, then you're going to be sure as crap ready to make sure that those 5 that you send are actually meaningful, not just random unpersonalized LinkedIn connections or
exactly
emails with here's my calendar, book a 45-minute demo.
That's right. Yeah.
Dude, I love this. So it's something as simple as just guiding people in the beginning with the price transparency. People when we work with customers just like you, it's usually in this range. Sometimes people say, well, how much is it going to be for us? We go, great, let's find that out. And in order for us to find that out, we have to do this and this and this. Once we get these questions answered, then we give you a price down for the penny.
Exactly. I mean, our buying brain is in a constant state of prediction, and uncertainty is a crazy maker for the brain. It literally lowers our IQ. And what I mean by that is, as we're hearing stats, data, creating feelings, getting emotional about the value that could be created, if we don't know what the downside is going to be, our brains are not able to process the upside properly. And again, it goes back to why negative reviews work, but it also goes back to this idea of, is the juice worth the squeeze? That squeeze is not just the dollars, it's the effort, it's the resources, it's the time. We're trying to assess all of that, and it's also the risk. Like, what could go wrong? What's gone wrong for other companies? Until we get real comfortable with that element, all of your value talk is going through. There's another guy that calls it the limbic filter, but it's, as things are making its way into your feeling brain, it's going through a little filter because it hasn't quite matched up the value to the squeeze. And so we've got to get all that stuff out as early as possible in the sales process. And to kind of wrap that up, it'll help you to qualify deals in faster that you should win, qualify deals out faster that you're going to lose. And the end result is more valuable deals that close faster, that you win a higher percentage of. And then, oh, by the way, we haven't even talked about the idea that it makes it really hard for your competitors to compete against you. When you've already laid out the pros and the cons, and they come in and go, oh, they suck, and here's why. They're like, oh, they already told us, and that second one's a lie, right? Like that, like just completely cuts off your competitors at the knees too. Like I'm obviously a biased transparency bigot, but man, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid that there aren't magic bullets out there, but that one's pretty close.
Well, I mean, for anybody that's contemplating it, it's worth a couple of experiments on it, right? Just try it for yourself, and there's a reason that this stuff does work. And it's just taking it, adopting it, and then adapting it to your business, right? And the only way you're going to know is if you go try it. And I think if you try
Exactly.
it, you're probably going to find we do the same thing. People want to join our coaching program, 15-minute chat, and we tell them, look, for people like you, it's going to be in this range. And like just letting you know, if you've got access to that, then let's have a longer conversation about how it works.
That's
And it's that
beautiful.
simple. Yeah.
Yep, that works. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I find really interesting is that we've always known transparency works. Now, me being a sales history nerd, I started finding elements of this 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 90 years ago, 4,000 years ago. There was a Greek philosopher named Baltasar Gracian in 1647 talking about this idea that around transparency and about exaggeration and how exaggeration makes your products look foolish, makes you look foolish. And I'm like mesmerized by the idea that we've always known that transparency sells better than perfection, not only in pros and cons, but in pricing. It's not until now that we've gotten to this proliferation of information that's telling us we've got to do it. Like now we have to do it. You can no longer hide your flaws and expect to get away with it.
That is a wrap in part 2 with Todd Caponi talking about price negotiation, transparency negotiation, transparency and pricing. What we're going to do is split out my conversation today into a second episode. So look for that coming in the next couple of weeks. In the next episode with Todd, we talked for about 20, 30 minutes around we talked about sales and sales history, which is one of his hobbies. And I think it's really important that if you're like, I'm not like a sales history person, I'm not a history person, that sounds kind of geeky. There's a lot of the research that he's done that is extremely appropriate to today's world when it comes to selling and how the principles around selling, frankly, have not changed in the last 40 years, the last 100 years, the last 400 years. And he's done research and read about the profession of selling and the concepts of selling and the principles of selling going back hundreds of years. And I think now more than ever, it's important for us to get back to some of those core principles because of the world that we're living in when it comes to being transparent, being honest, showing up the right way on your Zoom calls, learning how to navigate organizations. All of that is very, very relevant in today's world. And I think you're really going to enjoy that segment of an episode with Todd. So again, thanks for listening to the Startup Selling Show. If you haven't already downloaded a copy of my book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, now would be a good time to do it. Go over to QualiaSales.com/book. And you just type in your email address. We'll send over a full and complete personal copy of the book right to your inbox. It'll also add you to our email list so we can let you know about live trainings that I'm doing, webinars. We're sending out posts, tactical posts around sales tips every week. It's a really good list to be on, I don't mind saying, because we're pumping out tons of great content and also keep you up to date with the different programs that we're running when it comes to sales acceleration, sales coaching, and ways that we can help you grow and scale your startup. So that's it for now. Talk to you next time. This is Scott Sambucci signing off.